Good evening and welcome everyone. I'm happy to be the moderator of this very interesting titled panel, the Future Energy and Mobility, Batteries and More. I would like to ask my panel member to join me and I'll ask them accordingly. First, Mr. Paul Smith, the Director of the Future Mobility Hubs at BP. Paul is responsible for identifying and developing material, scalable and sustainable mobility opportunities for BP's downstream business in a low-carbon, digitally enabled future. Thank you, Paul. Next, Mr. Eric Partington, the Director of Product and Technology Planning for Lear's E-System Group. Lear is one of the world's largest automotive Tier 1 supplier with revenues approximately $20 billion, including the industry's most vertically integrated seating business and the E-System Group in automotive electrical distribution and electronics. Thank you. Next, Mr. Bart Bielbuk is the Executive Director of Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking, the FCH, a public-private partnership aiming at facilitating the deployment of fuel cells and hydrogen technologies in Europe. Our next panelist is Mr. Virgilio Cerruti, who is the Vice President, Business Development Central Coordination of Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, and also a long-known friend of mine. Doron Meisdorf, who is the CEO and founder of StoreDot, which is a startup company for organic materials that can dramatically improve the performance of a range of devices, including batteries. And last but not least, Mr. Andreas Schamel, who is the Director of Global Powertrain Research and Advanced from Ford. He's also the Director of Ford Research and Innovation Center at Aachen, Germany. Thank you. And after this very brief introduction of you, since all of you have such an amazing bio, I would like to share with you why I asked you to join me in this panel, which is actually, you know, me as the Chief Scientist in the Ministry of Energy, this time is amazing. So many innovative technologies, so many ground breakthroughs and some new ideas, new concepts are coming, and it's exciting and great. But, you know, I'm in a Ministry of Energy, and it's a governmental ministry. And for us regulators, when we say interesting, we mean problem, okay, because it means that we have to do a lot of things. And we are struggle with the questions of what exactly to do and what to do first and what is more important than the other. And having such a variety of long-term future projection for the energy, for the transportation sector, for the mobility sector, is a problem. We see very different and very varying conceptions of how the mobility sector will look like from either governmental organization or non-governmental organizations. And we have to decide on which scenarios to look more precisely. So I would like to use this opportunity of having you here in order to gain more knowledge and information to my activities. And I hope the audience will find it interesting as well. So I would like to start really with you, Eric, and ask you, why do you think there are such differences in the projections? Why should there be such differences? I mean, we all sit in such summits and hear, so why is it happening?
Well, I think that the biggest challenge in forecasting these technologies is related to a few items. First of all, they're very dynamic, right? There's a lot of invention that's going on. And when you're inventing new technologies, it's never entirely clear when they're going to be ready for the marketplace. And so I think that's an important element of why it's difficult to forecast. And the other important element is that there's a lot of different strategies going on. For example, when you think about electrifying the powertrain of a vehicle, you can do a little bit. You can just add a start-stop functionality. You can do more with a mild hybrid where you're giving traction assist, a full hybrid or full electric vehicle. And they each have their own benefits, costs to consider. And when you're trying to produce a product where essentially, as we just saw from Renault's presentation, you're asking customers to pay more for essentially the same, or maybe in some cases diminished performance, where they maybe have range limitations and so on. So these are all challenges. So kind of Lear's approach is to make sure that we have scalable core technologies spread across all of these different areas. So one area where we see a lot of activity right now in the marketplace, for good reason, is in the 48-volt mild hybrids. We're seeing large adoption of these platforms going forward because you can achieve maybe 70% of the efficiency at much lower cost and much simpler implementations into a vehicle. To date, we've been awarded 29 different vehicle platforms with the 48-volt technology across 6 different customers, 3 continents. So it's really starting to take hold and becoming a mass market technology.
Thank you. Paul, coming from the traditional industry of energy, how do you see these different projections, and which one do you take into account more seriously?
Well, first of all, let me say shalom, Shmi Paul. Thank you for inviting me today. There's a whole range of reasons why the forecasts are so varied. To build on what Eric said before, you know, on the demand side, we don't yet know how the consumer are going to respond to the products that are coming out there. We've seen research that says that it isn't just range that causes people concerns, it's speed of charge. Speed of charge is something that we really believe in at BP. We believe that we want to see a network that has faster charge over time to make it, as you said, not worse than the world we've got today, but at least as good as. Because people want progress, and progress means at least as good. It means better than. So we want to enable a world where people can charge their cars quickly as they can refuel. So that's something we're working on. But to build on some other things that are leading to some differences, if you look on the supply side, as battery costs come down, we're also seeing that the efficiency of existing ICE engines through hybrids is increasing. That's very hard to model. And then you get involved with the infrastructure that exists for charging, and the networks that exist varies massively by country. So we're going to see a world where different parts of the world electrify more quickly than others. We see that in some examples already. Someone mentioned before how in cities you'll get different speeds. The way we're approaching it is that this range of scenarios that you described before is actually quite similar, given the number of different variables that are out there.
Okay. It's interesting to learn what the OEMs will think about these projections. So, Virgilio.
Sorry.
Thank you, Bracha. The first time that I've been here in Israel, I have the big opportunity to meet your former president, Mr. Shimon Peres. And I remember a sentence which is still very bright for me. He told that here in Israel we are pragmatic visionary. Trying to answer to your difficult question, nowadays in the world there are about 1.2 billion vehicles installed, running. And there are about 100 million capacity installed. This is the picture. 95% of these vehicles are running with oil, being gasoline and diesel. 2% roughly are natural gas, 2% are alcohol fuel, and 1% is hybrid and pure electric. This is the picture. With the capacity installed, which is 100 million, which is running on a yearly basis and be even increasing. So I do think that one thing that for sure will happen is that we are going to have a transition period. I don't know how long it will last, this transition period. I for sure believe that the environmental topics are key ones, but we have to deal with reality. So another important word in your names is choices. Since it's very difficult to answer which is the right solution for every kind of customer, for every kind of solution. Also in order to maintain during this transition period a transition economy, because in a way or another the oil monopoly, which is the current one, is a situation that has been able to sustain and to develop with strong and weaknesses and sound and robust economy. So I guess that we have to look to the picture 360 degrees and to experiment, different choices. There are some technologies which are ready, and by the way, we became friends because we have started to experience some, technologies here in Israel, for instance, by combining the natural gas and, for instance, to transform the natural gas in methanol, which is an alcohol very similar to the ethanol. Brazil is the only country in the world nowadays that has a choice. They are consuming roughly 50% gasoline and 50% ethanol. So I guess there are a variety of technology, and we have to consider the overall picture. So to deal with a transition period, and meanwhile also with a sustainable 360 degrees, a transition economy. There are still some data which are very important. Nowadays in the world, about more than 40% of electricity is produced by coal. So for sure, we have also to shift from strong fossil fuel like coal towards renewables. So it's not something that could happen in a very quick time.
So your advice for us is not to look only at the long-term point, but also to look at all the long way that we'll have to do to getting there. Yes. Do you, Andreas, share the same perspective as in Ford?
Yeah, there are actually quite a few similarities, but maybe let me start with a quick definition, because there was kind of mild hybrid was mentioned in one of the previous responses, and when I'm talking about kind of electrification or renewable transportation, I would say define this as kind of pure electric or pure renewable, because I think by 2025 I don't think we will see many products which don't at least do recuperation and have a level of hybridization on board to kind of do the obvious low-hanging fruit. But if you look at kind of the broader, more complete picture, battery electric is coming, but there will be a significant transition period for various reasons. Customer acceptance is one at this point in time. Consistent policy is another one. But for real scale, equally important is we shouldn't focus too much and only on what is the storage medium kind of in the vehicle we move around. We have to look a little bit more on what is the broader picture where the energy is coming from. Because the whole kind of for regional, inner city, China pollution, kind of the local zero emissions is clearly a key point. But for a broader global view, you really need to come to a picture where the overall harvesting is more renewable and on a more consistent picture. And if you get to that kind of scale where that really moves the needle, you I think ultimately will end up coming back to chemical energy carriers produced in a renewable fashion, because there's a lot of transportation out there which pays a lot of premium for energy density. Yeah, I can imagine flying taxis, but I can't imagine flying A380s over the Atlantic. And they need by 2050 also need to be kind of renewable. So there will be kind of an industry picture coming in to kind of force us to put renewable energy in something else than battery storage. And when we get to kind of a move along those lines, it becomes somewhat more secondary on how you convert that energy in the moving vehicle versus how you store it in the vehicle.
So we've talked here and we heard about the different ways of storing energy in the vehicle, and it brings me to the concept of course, the fuel cells and the whole concept of hydrogen as another alternative. And I would like to address you, Bart, and ask you, how do you see, I mean, will there be a specific kind of electric vehicle which is more applicable for one sector in the transportation, and the hydrogen will be for other sectors? How do you envision this?
Thank you very much, and also I'm very happy to be here. So, as already other speakers mentioned, there will be several kind of technologies existing next to each other, and it will be very much depending on the customer needs, really. What does the customer want? Does he drive just around the church, or does he really has to cross the country for example, like a salesman? So that will be one determination factor, what kind of technology he will select. The second one is of course also how the energy locally is produced, and you already mentioned that, but that's very, very a good point actually, because if there's a lot of renewables, too much renewables, maybe he will use hydrogen, for example. So these are two important things. And then what I would like to mention is that we see the heavy duty sector. Okay, so the heavy duty sector, what we see there is that gradually fuel cells and hydrogen will play a very, very important role there, because I mean there's a lot of weight to be transported, long distances, quick refueling, time is important. So there we see, for example, like in Europe next year, we will have trucks driving first on hydrogen, they will start. Also, we see maritime application, boats, cruise ships going to hydrogen. But I think what is very important also, trains. And actually today, the train sector already makes a business case. We see the hydrogen trains in Germany coming, but also in Netherlands, Norway, Italy, they're all looking into that. Why is that? Because it's just simply 50% cheaper than putting the electrical wires there. And I believe in Israel still you have a lot of train or rail sector to be decarbonized, and I think you also could have a look here in Israel to hydrogen trains, because it might save a lot of taxpayers' money here. So I think the key message I would like to bring is that as a government, stay technology neutral, and look, the market will decide, or the customer will decide what kind of technology he needs for his own benefit.
Thank you, Bart. Well, whatever it will be, I mean, if it will be batteries or hydrogen fuel cars, all of those need extensive infrastructure, whether it is for charging, high-speed charging for batteries, or fueling stations in hydrogen. And the question is, and maybe Doron, you can address this question, who do you think should build and operate and pay for this infrastructure?
Okay, so I want to start with the fact that batteries is hard, it's difficult. And just to comment on all the other discussion here, you know, if fast charging is happening, then a lot of these problems are being, fast charging of batteries. So a lot of the problems of the distance, and even in heavy truckload, and the experience of the driver is like fueling, only without the fumes. So when we talk about who's going to pay for that, I think this will be a natural evolution of the existing gas stations that have all this real estate. Like BP, I think, has 17,000 gas stations, something like that.
17 to 18.
17, 20. And these gas stations are major real estate in the cities. They're sitting on loads of money. But they understand, not only BP, I mean all the gas companies, they understand that it's going to disappear over the next 2-3 decades. So I think having the infrastructure in terms of real estate and the staff, and now they're also working on the technology. So I think it will be an evolution, especially in Europe, the evolution of the existing real estate of the gas stations into charging stations. China is different. Like I've met with the government of Beijing. They have unlimited resources. Unlimited resources. They talk in trillions. Okay, so they're going to change the federal grid and the local grid. They talk about it like it's M&M, you know, like each of the stations that they're building. So I think in China, because of the problems of the pollution, they are taking very drastic steps, measures in order to replace all the combustion engines, and they will pay for it in China. So different models in different places.
Well, I wouldn't say that China have endless resources. They just are very fast in making decisions and making it happen. And
compared to Israel, it's
yes.
infinite.
Okay. Eric, would you also like to say, what do you think about these different technologies for different transport sectors? How it will all get along together?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, technology is really why we're here, right? So in Israel, we're actively pursuing new technologies, partnerships, collaborations, and I think there's a great ecosystem here happening in Israel that we want to be a part of. And so as we think about electrified vehicles in the future, we don't think of them only as electrified. We think of them connecting kind of the main megatrends as we think about it, autonomous, connected, and efficient or electrified vehicles. And so we are taking kind of a comprehensive approach of looking at technologies across these areas because we think that they're converging and they help enable, so connected technologies can help enable customer adoption, for example, of electrified architectures. But they're still, being a tier one in the automotive space, one of our main roles in the industry is to provide technologies that can enable our customers to deliver the products that they're interfacing with their consumer customers. So our role is to build the core technologies, enable the power electronics, the electrical distribution systems, and really put our OEM customers in a position to provide the most efficient, best products that they can deliver to the consumers. And so that's really our focus, is delivering on new technologies, converting from raw technologies, getting them ready for the automotive industry.
Paul, do you think that the traditional industry and the majors such as the BP would be able or will be willing to invest in the infrastructure for this alternative energy?
I think, ultimately we're sometimes described as an oil company, but I think we're an energy company. Over the last 100+ years, we've adapted to consumer needs, and a lot of statements have been made here on the panel about needing to adopt to what the consumer wants. The industry as it exists today with a lot of home charging that's out there reflects really a lot of early adopters who often have access to off-street parking. At least less than 50% of most European countries, the homes don't have access to off-street parking. So there's going to need to be additional infrastructure put out there if we want the whole of society to have access to electric cars. So I'm sure, we've already seen some of our competitors who I've seen in the room today, have made investments publicly, and I'm sure that BP will be willing to put charging points out there. We already have a small number in Europe already, which we're using to learn from. It's really just a question of making sure that it's the right asset, because one of the things we want to avoid is essentially the VHS versus the Betamax scenario. I mentioned before that the research we've seen suggests that consumers' two key issues with moving to electric cars are range, but also the speed of charging. And actually, when you move up to faster charging and you're putting much more power into the vehicles, or if it was hydrogen as well, that technology is going to require significant safety management. And I think then the traditional players have really got a role to play, because people want reliable charging and they want safe charging as well. And just to build on reliability, if I may, I'm actually an EV driver myself, so I've got some first-hand consumer experience. So I have a Renault Zoe to declare my bias, which I'm very positive about. But as every EV driver has, there's the positive story, but also the things that you learn of how to live with it. And the issue that I have is not range. It can deal with my journey to the train station and back for several days. There's no issue there. But on the rare times when I want to take it further, charging points are often not reliable. So they're not that quick. If I'm willing to accept that at the moment, they often don't work. Too frequently they don't work. And I was speaking with Drives, a startup outside who's here today, who was talking about how their software increases that reliability. And there's a number of companies doing similar, I think. But that reliability is important. So directly to your question, I think the traditional companies will have to and will want to respond to consumers. I think that will inevitably mean investments, and we're already starting to see that.
Andreas, do you can imagine infrastructure branded as a Ford?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say branded as a Ford, and probably 10 years ago would have given a totally different answer than now. But normally, I wouldn't say 10 years ago, I would say automotive OEM company doesn't really get into the energy supply side of things. But we have to realize that some of the technologies we're facing, a battery electric, kind of the prime one here, has pain points to the customer. And if we don't address them as OEMs, then we inhibit kind of the change. And kind of, I think it was almost a year ago in Europe where there was a memorandum of understanding signed and published of the OEMs partnering up to put kind of the high-speed charging infrastructure into place. So I'm not here to make announcements, but this is moving along and it's sort of going to happen. So and this is not branded Ford and should be branded Ford because to resolve the pain points for the customers, it needs to be a cross-industry solution here to really, really help that and make that works.
Bart, any good practices we can learn from the hydrogen activities?
Absolutely. And I think here, for me, the role for the government is very important. I mean, not only funding, because you have to support to the initial kickoff, but secondly also to bring partners together. And already the example in Germany, but also we are a public-private partnership, the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen joint undertaking with the European Commission and then with the industry, 110 partners, also 68 research associations. And we work together. And so basically we have very good examples like, for example, the buses. We brought together 82 players in the bus industry from users like cities and regions, operators of the buses, the bus builders, fuel suppliers, and so on. We built them all together, and we made a very clear pathway how to go. And then together with public funding, together with the industry investing in it, all together you can make it happen. And today we will fund from the European Commission 350 hydrogen buses, but also the industry is putting there the money in. So together you can make it happen. Because today, honestly, there is no business case. I mean, even for battery electric vehicles or even for fuel cells, I mean, still it's very expensive. The infrastructure is very expensive, and there's not a lot of cars there or heavy-duty things to have a return of investment. So you have to work together to make it happen, and the policy should support it.
And it brings me, you got to the business point of view. And Doron, being a person who can think out of the box of new ideas, new concepts, do you maybe you heard some of the lectures that were here before this day. What kind of a new business model, really new ways of doing business in this area of electric mobility will evolve to your mind?
So I think, everybody understands that there is a major disruption that is happening in the industry. It's not just the electrification, but it's also the car sharing and the connected world. So I think, in the future, and we've seen the movie from Renault and from others, that, in 2050, and I want to be a pragmatic visionary, in 2050, we won't see drivers at all. Okay, so it will be fully autonomous, and we won't smell any fumes. I'm sure that there'll be some, like you go to a coffee shop, sometimes you see somebody smokes, which is like bizarre, but like if it was like 20, 30 years ago, everybody smoked, right? So it will be the same thing. If there'll be a smoking car, everybody will look, hey, it's still on the road. It's like it will be the outliner. And plus, I think the whole world of connected, because of the huge advances in big data and the ability to analyze and to optimize in real time, the shared vehicles and the destination of each of the passengers, and to optimize the time that they spend traveling, and also, if you look about what will happen to Waze and Google Maps in 30, 40 years, they will already take care of the mass optimization. So it's not only optimizing your route, because what's happening today, when you are being diverted, like you, there are dozens of other people and you are in a new traffic jams. But if the system can, in real time, really simulate and predict the traffic, then time people will spend in the vehicle will be much less, especially in the cities. And I think long-distance transportation will be much less than today, and there'll be a lot of air traffic that will also be electrified. So I think the world will be very different, and we need to understand that as we think about all the hurdles of today and who's going to pay for that, and you know, it's really difficult, and there's only 1% of the cars. I think if we really leap forward and think ahead, you know, once a technology is there, and the technology is there, either for batteries or for fast charging or whatever, it's in the lab and it's working. Usually, and I know it also from my previous life in the semiconductor business, once you see, let's say, an SSD, solid state drive, I saw it in the lab at 2000. It took about 9 years and everybody became with an SSD. So it's about a decade between you see a solution in the lab until it really takes over the market. And we are now at the beginning of this decade. So I think within a decade, our kids, or at least our grandkids, will not know what a driver's license is. It will be really a bizarre experience for them to really sit behind the wheel. There won't be a wheel, okay? I think we really need to understand that we are living the history of really how the world is evolving to be something very different than in the previous 100 years.
Virgilio, going back to this transition phase, and learning from your experience with the Israeli Fuel Choice Initiative and the work with our ministry, how do you, how it was your vision of the future of energy has been impacted by this experience?
Look, first of all, I guess that it's very interesting to me to have seen the evolution since you have started from the fuel choices, and now you have added the smart mobility. So I guess that you are now encompassing a 360 degrees vision about this disruption that is really happening in the world of transportation. So it's very exciting. I really do believe that here we are nowadays in a country where we are really experiencing many innovations that will enter in the automotive industry. I have already commented about fuels and alternative powertrains. I would like also to comment about smart mobilities. You have here Intel and Mobileye, that I guess Mobileye is the first startup that really become a reality for the automotive industry, and it happened here in Israel. So first of all, really, it's always a pleasure to be here and to learn how you are really moving quickly. Let's say, offering new technologies, again, on the three drivers that are reshaping the automotive industry, which is, by the way, for sure, the alternative fuels, alternative powertrains, 360 degrees. I've already commented that likely the right approach in the transition period is to have choices. Also because to move from a monopoly to another monopoly, whatever will be the new one, maybe it could be a little bit risky. Then for sure, autonomous driving and connectivity, and all other aspects that are entering, some like cybersecurity, which is, less fascinating than autonomous driving or connectivity, but is a direct consequence, it's a necessity, it's a must. We are becoming aware, maybe with some delay with respect to the IT industry, that in order to be autonomous or connected, you have also to be safe, because you can accept some issue on your mobile phone, but you cannot on your vehicle, since it's a matter of your life in the end. It's really exciting.
Well, we have the privilege, as being the last speakers of today, to send people here home with your take-home message. So please use this opportunity, and we'll start with you, Andreas.
Yeah, I think an interesting discussion. Maybe a couple of comments to what we just discussed. I think what we are doing sometimes is a bit blending in the answers what in reality is a multiple of problem statements. So I think what with the previous comment here, kind of where we are around personal mobility, personal transportation, where the problem statement is convenience and congestion and maybe local pollution. Right now we are kind of have a really wasteful and way of handling that part of transportation, because we kind of move a body of 75 kilograms around in 1.5 tons of vehicle. So a lot of this breakthrough of mobility, communication, networking, services will kind of solve that much more fundamentally, and we will see this in city moving really, really quickly, and I think we will get to those points and see real revolution there. But on the other hand, we shouldn't kind of neglect that transportation is more than just that part of the problem, that there's other parts of the problem where we are moving goods and where the relationship of the payload we are moving and the vessel we are moving it in is of very different nature. And in that area, we have to go back to the fundamentals of really watching kind of how we manage the energy. The reason why I'm coming back to that point, I think it was mentioned before, an important piece of this is policy. Right now, when it comes to the OM, we have a policy which kind of matches us on a sort of tank to wheel, rather than matching the industry and putting environment into place which matches on efficiency of miles traveled or tons moved. And kind of consistent policy which allows kind of a real, leaves it open what are the technical choices, because they will differ on what problem you're trying to solve. Would, I think, be key to really move the needle.
Thank you. Doron, it's your turn.
So I think the take-home message is that fast charging is happening big time. And today the #1 barrier for people not to have an electric vehicle is the speed of charging. It's just that it's inconvenient to really charge overnight, or have the anxiety that you won't have enough mileage. So I think, in few years, once fast charging will happen, there's going to be a hockey stick in the amount of electric vehicles that we will see, and all the rest will follow. The infrastructure and the models and the better cars and the efficiency, it's all coming. And fast charging is a big part of that.
That's right.
So, for my side, I mean, we have to decarbonize our energy. And if we look today, you have 3 main contributors. And of course, transport is one of that, and that's what we discussed. But also, don't forget heating and cooling of buildings. And then, of course, your energy production itself. On energy production itself, well, we have solar, wind, probably we will make it to reach the targets. Well, on transportation, we're far behind, and on heating and cooling, we are also far behind. So it will be pretty difficult to reach all those targets. So what we have to remember, this is the key word, is sector coupling. Please don't think in silos. Don't think only transport, don't think only heating and cooling. Work together, make the sector, the coupling. And this is so crucial. So partner up with each other, make consortia, work together, because we all have one single goal. And this is about reducing the CO2, and that's the only way we can make it together, and fast is working together.
Eric.
I'll just add that it's a real privilege to be involved with the automotive industry at this time. The acceleration of technology being brought in, as you point out, across sectors, coming in from all of the different industries out there, high tech, other transportation industries, building sciences, materials, and bringing them into the automotive industry, which is my personal focus. Being able to accelerate the change in the industry is a really exciting time that we really haven't seen before, and it's a privilege. And I also will just add on the specific point you mentioned about the convenience of charging being critical. And I'll just mention that wireless charging is a really important element of the technology, can really go up to high efficiencies and high power rating, and really changes the whole convenience factor for consumers to be able to get the energy on board their vehicle without having to get out and plug anything in, any extra steps. And that's an important area for Lear that we're specifically pushing on to address that particular problem.
Okay, it's always tough to go last down the list, so I don't envy you either. But so just to reiterate a couple of the points and build slightly. I'm struck by the comment that in sort of 10 years' time, or maybe 20 years' time, people won't need to drive. An example I've been given, I've got two young boys, one of 7 and one of 4. We live out in the countryside, which will mean adoption will be slightly slower. But we've been assuming since I started this job with BP a year ago that the 7-year-old would probably need to drive, at least take his driving test, and the 4-year-old would probably never need to learn to drive. In the space of this year, I'm now probably in the situation where I believe that neither of them will ever learn to drive. So I think that's how quickly I think things are changing. And I think just to build on the point that Bart made about partnerships, and a shameless plug, you know, a couple of people have been surprised that BP is here. You know, we want to make partnerships. Partnerships are going to make this happen. If we're going to end up with enough infrastructure so that we don't get constrained with how fast consumers can adopt things, the world's going to be about partnerships. That's why we're here. We're here to see the amazing innovation, and I've seen some great stuff outside. So please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Our representative is Yoni Dolgan, who's here. Many of you know him, so please do reach out to us. Apologies for the shameless plug, but I did come all this way.
Don't apologize. Virgilio, have the last words.
Let me continue about partnership. So I guess that are absolutely fundamental partnership in between among different stakeholders, private, public, private producing vehicles, private and public producing infrastructures, and governments defining rules and regulations. I believe this is key in order to manage and to transform such a complex environment. All the experience that we had, I mentioned Brazil, I mentioned Italy, and I mentioned Israel, you know, in order to change, you know, for instance, to introduce a new system of energy, you need broad partnership with different stakeholders, private and public. And also to develop technologies, because I mentioned before Intel and Mobileye. We entered in a consortium where we are car makers. There are the so-called tier 1. There are companies like Intel and Mobileye. So, I mean, when you are talking of, in general, automotive, but in terms of changing this industry and the energy matrix in general for this industry, you need broad and effective partnerships.
Well, you gave me a lot of things to think about, and you have very good take-home messages. And my take-home message for you and for you is please keep innovating and don't worry about the regulation. That's our problem.